hand it off to Rachel. I'm Carrie Welton, the Senior Director for Policy and Advocacy of Anti-Poverty and Student Basic Needs at the Institute for College Access and Success. Welcome to our new offices. Literally the first time I've been in this space as well, so hope it's working out. TCAS has a longstanding commitment to equity in higher education, including over a decade of effort improving college access and affordability in California. So we're really pleased to be able to host this event and hear from the panelists about the experiences of higher education leaders, especially leaders of color. So with that, I'll hand it over.
Great. Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you so much to TCAS for letting us use your brand new office space. Oh, sorry, we're gonna just hold 1 second so that the people online know what's going on too. We have some audio connection there. I know. Hybrid events are always a challenge. We all good? All right. It might not, it looks like, yeah, it's connected. I can see it lighting up, so we should be fine.
Yeah, it is lighting up, but like I cannot hear the audio through my phone.
I think it's
Okay.
We'll figure it out.
It's how we look, not what we say.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Nice opening for a panel talking about women in leadership. Thank you, Larry. Well, yeah, hopefully the audio didn't pick that up. But thank you again, everyone, for being here today. And hopefully our friends online will get connected in a few minutes. So I just want to start off today. I'm Rachel Eschmarla. I'm the founder of Research Ed. We're an education policy research group focused on student success and removing barriers to equity. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research that I've been conducting with the Community College League of California. And then I'll turn it over to Ashley, who's going to share a little bit about some of the work that she's done, introduce herself and tell us about her work with the American College President Study, as well as some of the other research she's been doing on the experience of women of color in college leadership and in the leadership pipeline. And then Larry Galizio from the Community College League of California will give a brief introduction of some of the work that he's doing at the League, what they do to support presidents and trustees, and some background on the unique context in California, as well as the research that's just coming out. And then Dr. Martha Garcia from College of the Desert will share a little bit about her work and her personal experience as a college president in California. So the report that's coming out today is an addendum to the Community College League of California's, let me get this right, CEO Retention and Tenure Study. I always say the wrong thing.
Tenure and retention.
Tenure and Retention Study.
Same words, different order, but yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess we should be there first before you're retained.
Well.
In any event. So Larry and I had been having conversations for a long time about some of his concerns in the California community college system and how quickly presidents were churning through. They're experiencing a lot of turnover, as is the case in many fields, but the League was really interested in doing a little bit more in-depth work and getting an understanding of what are the experiences of presidents, what are the experiences of trustees, what's leading to some of these issues and how they can better support to prevent this churn from occurring. And so from January to March of last year, I conducted interviews one-on-one with college presidents, interviews one-on-one with trustees. We held focus groups and distributed a survey to presidents and trustees both. And some of the things that came out of that, one, I think will be a surprise to no one in the room is that the relationships between CEOs and trustees are really, really important and can be really challenging, particularly for college presidents that are women or women of color. A lot of the presidents that we spoke to also talked about the massive and increasing workload. Being a college president is no easy task, but recently that's become a larger standing order every day, with an increased focus on student basic needs, providing so many more things for the campus and community than ever before. And then another issue that came up a lot and that we're going to talk about today was kind of this notion that there's a lack of civility in relationships between boards and CEOs. And a lot of that really comes down to gender bias and racism that's being experienced by presidents in the system and by trustees as well. And then we'll talk a little bit today about some really unique legislative barriers that I think exist in California. So while this is certainly an issue across the country, there are some things that make it exceptionally difficult in the California context. And we also talked about some of the supports and what we can do to move forward. But I think we'll get into that a little bit later in the day. And I'll let Ashley introduce herself and talk about her work.
Thanks so much. I'm going to take a deep breath because every time I talk to folks, some kind of way the air just runs out, right? So if you take a deep breath with me, then we'll all have good air together, right? So I'm Dr. Ashley Gray. I'm going to give you a little bit about my background, some things that I think are important in establishing my positionality. I think that's important for myself as a researcher. So I'm born and raised in St. Louis, which means by birth, I'm a Cardinals fan. You get jumped in quite early, right? I'm a Howard University graduate, the first graduate actually of the Higher Education Leadership and Policy Studies program there. And I'm a presidential researcher. So everything at the intersection of college presidency times gender times racism. And we have a lot to talk about today, really at that intersection, right? And then last but certainly not least, professionally, I've worked in this space for quite some time. So I'm a former senior research analyst for the American Council on Education, leading up their American College Presidents Study. So I'm super excited to be here with you all today. And I want to talk a little bit about a research report that is forthcoming spring, summer. So we'll have to apply a little bit of nice pressure on ACE to give me a copy of that. But I conducted a study looking at the experiences of women of color who were semifinalists and finalists for presidential searches. In addition to that, I've done quite a bit of work around women of color presidents, my own dissertation being on the trajectory experiences of Black women college presidents and how they are often subjected to very volatile experiences in their search and then often in their presidency, right? And so I want to caution that this started off as an aspirational journey. So we were talking about people who want to be presidents, right? And that's sort of where I started. After doing my research, it shifted a bit to how can I actually support these folks? I don't know that we're asking presidents the right questions. I don't know that we're asking CEOs about their experiences in intentional ways. So I sort of set on a journey to do just that. So let's talk a little bit about this study that's coming out. Again, 5 women of color in this study. And I think it's important to note that even while doing this study, I had people reach out and identifying women of color who had not given me their names for this study. In addition to that, I had a white male researcher reach out and tell me that the study would be much more rigorous if I had added him to the team. So I want to situate that even as a Black woman researcher who studies women of color leaders, often you're questioned around your expertise, even in explaining their lived experiences. And so a couple things emerged from that series of interviews. And one of those things is around barriers of appearance. So we talked about it's not what we sound like, it's what we look like, right? And in some ways that was said jokingly because of the audio issue we were having with Zoom. But in some ways, that is very much a barrier to women of color ascending through the ranks all the way to the presidency, right? And so the question of professionalism, who gets to decide what professionalism means, what it looks like in the interview experience. Oftentimes things around wearing the wrong shade of a color for an institution can lead to a woman being berated. Also, if there is fat phobia being experienced by this candidate, that came up in the interviews as well. And then most certainly for women of color to straighten hair, do I wear it natural? Do I put it away? Do I need to put it in a ponytail? So what it really highlighted was this checklist, this invisible checklist that we talked about, that women of color have to also check off in order to be presidents, right? And these are things that other women and other folks don't have to always be as conscious of, right? Or just quite frankly, don't have to do. In addition to that, search transparency around how search firms were intentionally including folks of color, but not really supporting their application or their candidacy rather. And certainly just using them to say that this search had been a diverse search, whatever that even means at this point, right? In addition to that, how they heal after these abusive searches. So after their day-long, sometimes multiple day-long experiences on campus, how they were treated. word choices, how people refer to their names, how people mispronounce their names. And naming came up as a salient issue impacting women of color particularly, as it is often used to identify race, ethnicity, religion, all of these things. And so we've had a couple barriers that these women introduced. And before I go any further into the report, what I want to really leave us on is this audacity of hope. Despite every barrier that these women in this study faced, there is something very bold about maintaining some hope, even in the middle of to put it frankly, foolishness, right? And systemic barriers. And so if there's anything I can leave you with, it's really highlighting the resilience of these women beyond the barriers, and then talking about how we dismantle the systems that create the barriers. So thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. And I want to jump to Larry quickly. I like that you ended on the audacity of hope. And I think that from all of the work that we did together in California, it is very hopeful despite all of the barriers that presidents of color are facing, all presidents are facing, and the relationships between boards and trustees, all of the kind of legislative barriers occurring in California, but still everyone's very eager to dig in and serve students. And so would love to hear a little bit from you about the work that the league's doing to support presidents and trustees, and give us some of the context in California as well.
Sure. First, thank you, Tikas, for hosting this event. Thank you to all of you. Take time out of your busy day. And so Larry Glizio, president of the league. I'm this is my 7th year, excuse me, president of the league. The league, just in case you don't know, it's the statewide membership association. All 73 districts and 116 colleges are members of the league. We're an independent nonprofit 501c3. So specifically, we work with the leadership. Now, I know you could argue everyone's a leader who's working with students, but we work with the elected leaders, the locally elected boards of trustees, some of whom are here, pardon me, and then also the presidents, chancellors, and superintendent presidents at the colleges. And we have 2 policy boards made up of 15 presidents, chancellors, 21 trustees who represent their colleagues throughout California. And of course, when you're talking about California, it's just so massive. Hence just the number of institutions that we have. We should always avoid generalizing. At the same time, if you don't generalize, you can't even talk very much about it. So we do want to talk a little bit about what the league does. Just, for background, I grew up in Los Angeles and I went to school in the Bay Area, but at Santa Barbara City College was really a transformative experience for me. And then I lived and worked in the state of Oregon for almost 2 decades. I was a college president, I was a college faculty member, and I served in the legislature for 3 terms. So I got to see the policy level, and then a president, the campus level, and faculty level. So Rachel has been phenomenal, and it really added to the work that we've been trying to do. So since 1995, the league, when the trustees and the CEOs, I'll just use the term CEOs, even though I don't really like that term for the chancellors, presidents, and there was recognition that there were short tenures, and retention of college presidents and chancellors was a problem, as it often is. So the league started this, what is now a biennial tenure and retention study, and we just released the 10th study, supplemented by the great work that Rachel is mentioned and will continue to talk about. So we do a lot of professional development. We work with trustees, we work with presidents and chancellors, and our bias is that the people who know best what the issues are and what's unique about California are those leaders who have been or are currently successful, or trustees who have been in that role for 2 decades or recently retired. So it's informed by theory, but a lot of the work and a lot of the discussions and mentoring and case studies are based on what's actually happening at campus, on campus. And at the institutions themselves. So a couple of the things that I think are important to consider with California is we have a bilateral governance structure. We have a state agency, the chancellor's office, and a board of governors appointed by the governors. But really, the locally elected trustees and the locally elected boards, at least according to the education code, the law, the legislation, and Title V, the administrative regulations, the local boards are supposed to have the bulk of the power. The board of governors and the chancellor's office is supposed to the maximum degree permissible, cede power to the local boards, because the argument is they know best what the communities need, right? San Mateo is completely different from Riverside, which is completely different from Compton, right? So the locally elected boards, people from the community, involved in the community, probably know best, at least what's happening with the students in the area. So some things that be unique about California. So I think you've mentioned, so there's something called the Brown Act, and it has nothing to do with Jerry Brown, former governor. The Brown Act is a requirement of local governments that they have to provide for public participation, which in theory sounds great and is important, but it also can restrict and constrain the boards, especially boards that don't completely understand it. And then when we have a global pandemic and you're doing things via Zoom, how do you avoid a quorum? How do you comply with the Brown Act, yet at the same time have some of those discussions where you need to be very open and frank, and it doesn't fit under something that is allowable in closed session. So that's a challenge. Something else that I think is really challenging for California Community College trustees and for presidents, aside from just the multiple constituencies that you have to deal with. The pandemic also, I think this is state, national, really burned out a lot of people, and there was a lot more incivility, and that didn't help anything. But we also have regulatory regimes and laws that constrain their ability to do the work that's necessary. I won't get into the specifics, but there are some elements that make it very, very difficult and very challenging, so that district presidents and chancellors sometimes have to navigate certain laws or regulations in terms of making decisions about expenditures, not based on what's best for the community and the students, but what meets the letter of the law, and that makes it very difficult. I think I'll just stop there because there's so much more to talk about, but
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure Martha can jump right in where you left off. I'd love to, if you just start off, share a little bit about who you are, your background, and your experience as a woman of color, being a college president in California, given all of the complications that Larry shared, and would love to just have you talk a little bit about your experience and your role.
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to make sure that I acknowledge my board chair, trustee Stefan, thank you for being here, and my trustee D. Gonzalez, thank you, and the amazing ladies of the Women's Caucus who are here, and the trustees who also lead the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Accessibility Town Hall Committee, and I have the privilege of supporting them and working with them. And I want to start with that because it is only working collectively that we have the opportunity to serve our amazing students. I am a proud community college graduate and would have never had the opportunity to pursue higher education if it wasn't for a community college that afforded me the opportunity to do that. A community college located in a rural community where we experienced tremendous challenges, where the majority of the community was living in poverty. And as a proud daughter of farm workers, it was truly my pathway, and my foundation was set for success at that community college. It is that reason that I love the work that we do, and we do it collectively. It is, as I stated, only collectively that we could serve our students well. I have the opportunity to serve currently about 10,500 students in the Coachella Valley in a community where we see tremendous need, where 85% of my students are minority, where the majority of my students look like me, where the majority of my students, Latina females, could see themselves in me. And I want them to know that they have the opportunity to achieve any dream that they aspire to achieve. I want to share a little bit more about my professional journey, and I know our time is limited, and then I'll transition and talk a little bit about the challenges as a female CEO of color. So I shared with you, I started as a student in a community college, and my first professional opportunity to work at a community college was at the same college where I was afforded my education, in Pearl Valley College. So for me to be able to serve at that institution, and that journey started 23 years ago. It started when, as a single mother, essentially I was on CalWorks receiving state assistance one day, and the next day, an amazing man gave me the opportunity to start working as a part-time counselor. And guess who I was serving? CalWorks participants. Gives me chills just to think about that, because one day I was on one side of the table and the next day I was on the other side, helping people who had been struggling with not only economic barriers, but many other challenges. And that opportunity changed my life. That opportunity demonstrated to me that I was able to serve in a way that I never thought I would be able to. And it also informed me and convinced me that this is the career that I was going to serve in for the rest of my career. I was going to serve a community college and our community college students. And I ascended from being our part-time counselor to becoming the first female president for that community college, to becoming their youngest president in their history, and to creating amazing opportunities for students. Amazing opportunities of hope, amazing opportunities that ultimately would lead to them continuing on to achieve whatever goals they aspire to achieve. And I'll just name two very important contributions that I feel are my greatest contributions as the CEO. And well, I'll name three. First and foremost, my commitment to serve, yes, all our students, but specifically be dedicated to uplift and serve our food and housing insecure students. Created the first tiny housing project in the state of California in our system. When I was essentially told, no, nobody in this system has done this, like, yes, we're going to do it because our students deserve it. And secondly, created a correctional education program to not only serve our county incarcerated students, but our state prison incarcerated students. There's 2 state prisons there. In the history of California Department of Corrections, we graduated the highest number at a single time of incarcerated men. And it was truly, for many reasons, a transformational experience. And I feel honestly one of my greatest contributions. And I'll end by stating that that community college with limited resources in a community where dire challenges are experienced every day is the top 10 Aspen finalist. And they're waiting to hear in April, and I'm really proud of the work. I didn't do it alone. We did it together, and now they have an amazing leader who's continuing the work. But the foundation was set, and I served 21 years there, 21. And now I have the privilege of serving at College of the Desert, and I have amazing students who really just energize me every day and who I am honored to serve. But I also want, as I state that, I want to transition to being honest about the fact that it is difficult to be a woman of color serving as the president. It is a daily challenge. And it shouldn't be that difficult. We work really hard. We love what we're doing. We give everything that we can. And I just feel that we deserve a greater level of respect than what we may receive at times. Everybody deserves respect. I don't need to be acknowledged. That's not important for me. What is important for me is that the work that we do it moving forward together to serve our students and uplift our community, especially our community, which is experiencing dire challenges. But if we don't have the support that we need, how do we do this? It is unrealistic to do it in the best way and at the highest capacity that we can. Therefore, the relationship with trustees is very important. Yes, I lead the campus, and there's amazing employees that work at College of the Desert. It is an institution of promise. And if it wasn't because of the hope that my students give me and the fact that I see the employees work as hard as they do, it would be much more challenging, but it is a daily challenge.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Martha and I met when you were working at Imperial Valley, and the housing project was not completed yet. And so it's so exciting to have seen the progression of that work and all that you've done for your community. And I know that you're doing incredible things at College of the Desert now as well. And so kind of on that note, I have a question for all of you. But Martha, we can start with you. You know, you talked about, and I know how important service is to you, serving the community, serving your students. And that's something that I heard a lot in our conversation and in conversations that I had with other presidents. You know, the commitment of the role is so overwhelming, and everyone is very passionate and driven, you know, by their students, by working to make sure that students have what they need, which makes it very difficult to do all of the other things that are required of a president. And so one thing that I heard a lot about was a lot of college presidents concerned about the future of the role, concerned about the pipeline, and that they had a real desire. They saw people on their team, in their cabinet, who showed real potential, and they would, you know, love to work with them, mentor them, help them kind of into the pipeline. But there's not always the time because there's so many constraints to the role. And they also talked a lot about, and as you shared a little bit about, you know, kind of their journey to presidency and how important mentorship was, and how many people helped them through the door. And so, Martha, I'd love to hear, you know, you talk a little bit about, you know, your journey into the role and what you kind of think about, you know, the next generation of leaders, how we can help cultivate that. And Ashley, you know, would love to hear from your experience more at the national level. So you spoke to a number of different presidents, you know, what that looks like. And then Larry in California, I know, you know, you at the League and a number of other organizations are kind of supporting this work. You have I don't remember the name, I'm sorry, but you have a program supporting new college presidents and kind of building that pipeline for the next generation. So would love to hear kind of you share a little bit about that work and what that looks like for the future of presidents in California. So if you want to get us started, Martha.
So I want to thank the men who helped me through my journey. It was only men who mentored me to become and convinced me and reminded me of my potential. So they mentored me and helped me achieve or obtain an opportunity as a president, and really convinced me. My goal was that I would become a vice president for student services, and I was not interested in becoming a president. And I remember, and I'll name him because he knows this, Dr. Francisco Rodriguez was the chancellor for LA Community College District. He had a conversation with me in 2014. And during that conversation, he ended his last comment by stating, you need to become a college president in the system because you will be able to relate to students in ways that many of us will not be able to, and it's based on your own experiences. This system needs like someone like you. And it was that conversation in 2014 that led me to become a president, and I became a president by 2018. So I thank the men. As I shared, Dr. Victor Jaime was the one who gave me the opportunity to become a counselor, and he was the superintendent president prior to me becoming a president at Imperial Valley College. And I thank him and honor him because he changed my life with that opportunity he gave me. But I always wanted a female mentor. Like, we experience different challenges. We're treated differently. I really respect and I'm thankful to my male colleagues, but reality is there's things that we will never be able to understand in the same way because we're different. And it is with that desire that I had that I make the time. It is a priority for me to mentor aspiring female presidents and males. I've mentored males and will continue to do that, but specifically minority females. I want to make sure that we communicate very candidly what are the qualifications needed, yes, but then all the other experiences and expectations, because I will be honest with all of you, there are unrealistic expectations set for us, especially as female CEOs. We know we have to work 3 times as hard. We know that. We know that the expectations are higher. We know that. And yet we've committed and are committed. But I think some of my mentees are joining us online. And as busy as I am, because as a superintendent president, I report to a board, and I also lead the institution, the daily operations. It is an intense role, but it is my responsibility to help the next future generation of leaders. We need them. The system needs them. And I do that after 5, at 7, on weekends. They know that as long as they accommodate to my schedule, I am committed to help them. And I am committed to help continue preparing the future generation of college presidents because this system needs them.
Yeah. So I think that's a great launching point for me. Dr. Garcia, you mentioned something. You can tell I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm literally in interview mode, but you mentioned something around stumbling into the presidency. And this is something that a lot of women, particularly women of color, have expressed in their interviews with me, is not having planned to have been a college president, and not knowing that they've been doing the work of college presidents all along, right? And so when women are appointed to the presidency, they've long done the work before the appointment. And in some cases still don't see themselves as enough or presidential enough, right? There's this checklist that women candidates have been socialized to believe they need to check off completely to see themselves in this role. So one of the things I think we need to do is affirm women leaders in rotational experiences. So providing opportunities across campus to gain budgetary experience, for example, fundraising experience, navigating with communities, town and gown relationships. So rotational leadership seems to be pretty effective in making sure that women see themselves as presidential and preparing them. Not only that, I think we really need to expand this pipeline to the U.S. college presidency. You know, traditionally, we've talked about this academic route to the presidency, and gatekeeping is happening wherein women of color are not being promoted to faculty positions to be put into place to become college presidents. So we've got multiple stops along this quote unquote traditional pathway to the US college presidency, which is creating problems, right? So I would recommend that we expand it. The other thing I think we haven't effectively looked at is the doctoral experiences of women of color, right? We think about this presidential pipeline in terms of when they get into these professional roles, right? When they are faculty members, when they're department chairs, when they're deans, when they're chief academic officers. We fail to mention how doctoral programs can be socializing and sometimes excluding the aspirations of women and women broadly, and particularly women of color. And so I'll share this really quickly before we switch over. And I sat in a classroom and I told somebody, I want to be a college president. And I remember the reaction being that, oh, you are so bold to be able to say that. I kept thinking, what would happen in a world where we allowed students the space to ideate and to aspire to these roles? Then people would start to seek out intentional mentorship. People would start to seek out intentional opportunities. But I think the dreams of women college presidents are often killed within the four walls of our classrooms. So I think we've got a lot of work to do as it relates to equity. And I think we need to tell the truth about the underbelly of celebrating first, right? So you mentioned being like the first woman president, the youngest woman president. We're celebrating all of these things. And I think they merit celebration, right? Because barriers have been broken for you to be here. I think the underbelly of that is the institution naming that historically we've hired the same people to do this work. Both have to work for equity to actually be in place on these campuses. And so I think we've got a lot of work to do, and I'm still encouraged. Like you mentioned, there are a lot of folks who are still very much interested in the U.S. college presidency, despite pandemics, despite legislative oversight, despite all of it. And I think our job is to actually motivate and prepare them in the best way possible.
Can I interject before Larry continues? So I do want to share, I thank you, Ashley, for acknowledging that we should celebrate it, but it also, being the first in certain roles was also tremendous pressure. Because I say, I cannot mess this up. I cannot do this wrong. Because if I do it wrong, I will close the door for the next female CEO to come. Absolutely. And I refuse to do that. So there is, yes, we should celebrate it, but we should also acknowledge that those of us experiencing being the first is also very, you feel tremendous pressure.
I think also the state of the institution that these women are being appointed to. Oftentimes women leaders are appointed to clean up institutions, right? And so at what cost are you appointing your first woman president? At what cost are you appointing your first Black president? Are they walking into a racially violent space? Are they walking into an incredibly sexist space? And in a lot of cases, the answer is yes. You just hope that this first is going to do the work of equity, and it doesn't happen like that, right? So it's got to be a both and.
So I think you make a really good, point, both of you, and there's tremendous pressure, and also when women of color are hired into these roles, they're not always set up for success, like you said. And so I think that's very difficult to overcome. But the league is doing the good work to help us get there, and providing some training for new and aspiring CEOs. So would love a message of hope, Larry.
Yeah, so was at a board meeting of sitting college chancellors and presidents, and this was before the meeting started, and there was a discussion that, wow, my vice presidents or vice chancellors or individuals that I think would be great to ascend to the presidency are telling me they don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. And it was very concerning. And so out of that, we formed an aspiring CEO program. And we're in our third cohort, and we ask sitting college chancellors and presidents to nominate individuals, and we ask them to especially consider underrepresented individuals of color for these positions. And we've had very good diversity in our three cohorts, and then some of them have become presidents, not because they did the aspiring CEO program, but I think it helped because the seminar leaders are, well, we do have search consultants who talk about the search process, and boy, there's an area that needs a whole lot of research, more research. I know there is research, but that is what you were talking about is really important. Not that you didn't already know that, but I think that's an area that's under researched. And so, that's been gratifying. But we have research consultants, but we also have sitting CEOs and trustees who talk about everything from the multiple constituencies you serve, the challenges, if you want a friend, get a dog. I mean, these are very lonely, they're very lonely positions. Even if you have a phenomenal board, we have some trustees from California who, if all of our trustees were like 3 women sitting in the 1, 2, 3, 4th row, we would have a lot more success and longer tenure of all CEOs. But so it's been gratifying because I think it's helpful. It's not enough, but we've seen it. And so I think we've touched on this a little bit. So the good news in our 10th update is, so in April of 2020, 45.5% of the leaders of California community colleges were women, 59 out of the total, which was the highest recorded number of women CEOs in the history of, which is the states. We're the largest sector of higher education in the state. And actually nationally, it's the largest. I don't like to call us a system. We're a confederation of locally governed districts. And then so we were as high as 45% of the CEOs being women. And then I lost my, that number was increased. However, the problem is this: the tenure of women, and especially women of color, is not as long as the tenure of males. And so this gets back to, well, I think some of what we're seeing, right? This is a problem. So it's great to get into the position, but then some of what you've already talked about is an ongoing issue, an ongoing problem, and that we have to continue to work on, because again, the longer the tenure, it's correlated with more successful institutions.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a really great point, and leads into something I wanted to talk a little bit about, which is kind of digging more into the CEO trustee relationship. So studies, not the work that I've done, but there's a whole body of research that indicates that the single most influential marker for predictive success of a CEO's tenure is their relationship with their board. And so in the survey that I conducted, 83% of CEOs surveyed mentioned working with boards as one of the most challenging aspects of the role. And I think it's important to talk a little bit about what this relationship looks like nationally, but also again in the California context. Board members are often very experienced professionals, in their own field. Board positions are not typically full-time, they're not typically compensated or not well compensated. And so, like Larry said earlier as well, these are frequently people who are community members, just like not that college presidents are always community members, but they're all there to serve students and serve their communities. And so, often longtime community members with experience in a variety of fields that, they might want to contribute that expertise to the role, which sometimes is appropriate. Sometimes it might not be, right? So that's a challenge. And I think it can be very difficult to come to a college as a new president, especially new to the community. And Martha, I know you've had both experiences, being in a community that you grew up in, that you went to the institution as president, and in somewhere where you're newer to the community. And so I think it can be incredibly difficult to navigate these roles, especially, in California, especially as a woman of color. As a CEO, we found in our research that we asked presidents and CEOs in California about their relationship with their board. And 100% of the white male CEOs that responded to the survey responded that they have a great working relationship with their board. That was about, I want to say 75% for female CEOs of color. So a huge disparity there. And so I think that that's, something that we really need to think about. Relationships between boards and presidents are challenging everywhere, but particularly for women of color. And we know that that has an impact, like Larry said, and as the studies show, on retention. And so I just want to kind of open that up. I don't know that there's a question there, but I'd love to dig into that a little bit more and think about, what can we do to strengthen these relationships, make these conversations easier. People talked a lot about in our research, again, the qualitative, there's a lack of civility, and I don't think there's any easy answers here, but, where do we start? What can we do about this? Anyone who wants to jump in?
I could jump in from the personal perspective. It is critical, as I stated earlier, without the support and trust in our capacity and ability to do the work. Without that, it's very challenging to move an institution forward and address problems that are necessary at times to be addressed. It's not easy to address problems, but we must continue moving forward, doing the right thing, always, and making sure that our students are in the forefront of the work that we do. And our trustees are elected, so obviously there is, depending on the community, definitely political pressure, and depending on where they're located, that political pressure is intensified, and we have to be honest about that. But we must also be honest about the fact that the board has hired us as their only employee to do the work that's necessary to serve our students, and obviously make the decisions that are necessary to serve our students as best as possible. And sometimes those decisions are difficult. They are. But it's what's best for students. It may not necessarily be what's best for certain community constituents, but it's what's best for students. My role exists because of the students that I have the privilege of serving. And I fulfill purpose every day. And it is with that purpose that I make the decisions that are what I believe the best for students. So without that strong relationship, I could only be as effective as the trustees support me and trust me to be. And when those boundaries are crossed, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work, honestly. It is not worth to waste as much time as we may waste on really things that are not important. And I'll end there.
Yeah. I'll jump in. So I think understanding board composition is important. So for folks who may be unfamiliar, if this is a government appointed board, you are dealing with what you were appointed, right? So you don't get to form sometimes some of these private or common relationships, right? And so it's harder, I think, to work in some cases, maybe not harder, a different set of challenges. Let me say that, to work with an appointed board versus an elected board, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about board composition, if your board matches the demographic of your institution. And in a lot of cases, it often does not, right? So I think institutions who appoint who appoint trustees are often looking for folks who have great influence, right? Great influence. Fiduciary responsibility is obviously of the utmost importance. So these are people sometimes who have access to resources or know how to make the calls to find the resources. And so I think sometimes what we forget is thinking about how influence can work in multiple ways, right? So the relationship of trustees and their personal business, does their business align with your mission, right? So there are a lot of questions, I think, that we've got to ask. The other piece is around board training. So in some of the interview experiences with the women of color presidents that I interviewed, oftentimes the search committee, which in most cases is the board of trustees, had not been trained in any kind of way to talk about bias and questioning, had not been engaged in any way on diversity, equity, and inclusion, whatever that might mean for the respective campuses. And so people were literally walking into violent space, right? And then the last part of that is board accountability. a lot of people find it really, or a lot of institutions, quite frankly, find it really hard to think about what board accountability means, what happens. For example, after a search goes wrong, after somebody has been discriminated against, right? So how do you navigate that in your board dynamics? I think the other piece is, how do we get back to the mission of our institutions? And so ultimately, you talked about the decision-making benefiting, obviously, students. And I think when students are benefited, the mission is served, right? And so getting back to the mission of the institution and the appointment of boards of trustees has got to be of the utmost importance. And certainly making sure that the demographics at least match who you say you are and who you say you want to be as an institution. And quite frankly, I find that that's the most misaligned. I look at a lot of the work of scholar Dr. Felicia Commodore out of Old Dominion University. She does a lot of work on boards of trustees and board dynamics. She's awesome. Look her up. And not that I'm biased, but I am. But I am. But one of the things she really looks at, particularly as we look at like minority serving institutions, is how the boards, in a lot of cases, don't even match the students you serve, right? And so as we think about alignment, I think we really need to get back to humanizing higher education. And the way that we bring back the humanity in higher education is by making sure that we actually serve the people we say we want to serve, and we do it meaningfully. I think we've gotten a little bit away from that in some cases, but it's never too late to come home. Yeah,
Absolutely.
So Dr. Garcia said something interesting that, or actually, sorry, Dr. Martin, not Dr. Martin.
Not a doctor,
All right.
but you can call me one.
Yeah, you
Take it.
Yeah, but no, I think you said, I'm jet lagged. So somebody said it, was the notion of the sole employee is you said that, Dr. Garcia. So there's a difference between a board that perceives the institutional leader as my employee versus as the institutional leader. And so when we have boards that respect the background, the work, and to get to where you are, if you're a president, superintendent president, takes a lot of work, and you've gone through a lot. That doesn't mean you're perfect. Doesn't mean you can't be helped by an excellent board and trustees. But if they're viewed by somebody who's elected to a board as you're my employee, and this is, I want you to do X, then you need to do X right now. That's a problem. At the same time, there's a lot of responsibility for the president or chancellor to work with the board and to make sure that there's an understanding that this is the policy role. I need you to help with your expertise and your relationship in the community. I want to work with you. I'm going to be transparent with you. But when it comes to decisions about operations, I'm happy to explain why I'm doing something. At the end of the day, though, unless I'm doing something illegal, I need you to at least be cognizant of the fact that we're all here to have a sustainable, effective institution, and my expertise is important. So if you had a board at a hospital coming in when a surgeon is working and said, actually, I think you should start, I don't know anything about medicine, so I can't come up with a good example, but you understand what I'm saying, right? But if that board has expertise in hospitals and generally in what the community needs and provides that policy level, that's fantastic. So it's also incumbent upon the CEO to work closely with the board and you have to spend a decent amount of time, as Dr. Garcia certainly knows. So it's a two-way street. And I think a lot of trustees feel as if, hey, I'm not really getting compensated for this, or if I am, it's de minimis. I'm doing this because I want to help. And some trustees feel like they're being shut out, and what they do have to contribute is being ignored and minimized. And so if you lose that mutual respect and trust, it's going to be a bad relationship. And last thing I would say is you have to understand that if you're a board, that you only have power as a board. even though you are elected as an individual, you only have power as a board and you act as a board. And I think sometimes, especially in this political environment, everybody wants to stand out. And sometimes people are thinking about their next political position. And so they want to be different and that's a problem. That becomes a problem.
I think that's touches on one of the kind of biggest things that I found in the conversations that I had with trustees and CEOs both. CEOs reported over and over again that they don't feel like their trustees, saw them as a leader for the institution. They see them, I think I heard that phrase a lot about being the, sole employee. But you hear it in a positive and a negative. The
Yeah.
board needs to recognize that, or I need to be mindful of that I'm the board's employee, but you're also the leader of an institution. And on the flip side, every trustee that I spoke to said, my president just doesn't always value my opinion. Even at institutions where, the trustees and presidents reported having a great relationship, the trustees often felt overlooked. And so I think that relationship component is so critical. And also an understanding of what your role is. Exactly, like you said, Larry, you can't come in and start giving a surgeon, really minute orders on, how to complete the surgery. And I think that people are not even willing to really acknowledge or admit that they don't have a full understanding of the role. And so in the survey that we conducted, we asked CEOs and trustees alike, I have a clear understanding of my role in this position. Everyone said yes, 100% of both groups. I know everything about my role. And then we asked CEOs and trustees both, do other members of your board have a clear understanding of the role of a trustee, of a CEO? 65.
It was like,
60%.
they don't know what they're doing.
Either like only the smartest trustees took our survey and the most knowledgeable trustees and CEOs took our survey, or, people have a little bit more learning to do. But so I think to end kind of on the positive side of that, we also asked if people felt, both CEOs and trustees felt that they needed to learn more to be effective in their role. Like, do you need to learn more to be as effective as possible in this role? And almost 100%, again, of both groups, I think 85% of CEOs and trustees both agreed with that statement. So I think while, there's some hesitancy, which makes sense, as
The 15. Like I want to sit with that for a second. That 15% of people took that and said, I got all the
I got
knowledge
this.
I need to know.
yeah,
That's concerning.
it is concerning.
That's
Okay.
But I think I'm glad that you brought that up because I think it's concerning, but it's also indicative of what a stressful dynamic this is. As president, you've been elected by the Board of Trustees to serve and lead an institution and be their sole employee. You can't tell them that you don't know what you're doing, that you've never run a budget before, that you can't do the gown and town type of events. That's not acceptable, right? And similarly, as a trustee in California, it's an elected position. And I'm glad you provided that context. In some states, they're appointed. Either way, you've been appointed in many cases by, a leadership of the state. You've been elected by your community to, help guide this institution. You can't admit that you don't know what you're doing. I mean, there's no way. So I think there's a lot of tension there. It's very difficult. But I recognize we're a little short on time. We did get started late. So I'd like to kind of end just as we started on kind of a more hopeful note and, what you all see for the future. So Ashley, in your 2018 report and the Voices from the Field, you asked all of your research participants a question I really liked, which is, how would you hope to see higher education leadership change over the next decade? And so in just kind of a sentence or two, I'd love to hear all of your take on that. And then maybe we can take one or two audience questions after that. Whoever wants to get started.
So I'll make a brief statement. I definitely have tremendous hope for the future of community college presidents and the institutions themselves. It's important that we continue diversifying who our presidents are. And it is also important that, yes, with the pressure of having to know everything, that me as a CEO, that I humanize the role, that I don't know everything, that I continue learning every day. Every day I'm humbled, especially by my students, reminded what their needs are and how we need to continue improving what we do in order to best serve them. And that, especially for the California Community College system, the hope is that we do have great trustees that want to do what's best and work with us and support us, that we continue working with the league and others so that we continue enhancing that relationship. And obviously, as leader of the institution, I don't do the work that I do alone. I do it with the support of the employees, that everyone has a critical role to serve every day, but we all stay centered on our students. So tremendous hope and love for the profession.
So I was thinking about how I would answer that, and how do you say start over, baby, right? So I wish we were truthful enough to say that we've gotten it wrong so that we can actually do something new. I think there's power in I'm the problem. That's been something that's sort of resonating with me lately, right? Is owning when you are the problem, or your ideology is the problem, or perhaps the way you were socialized is an issue. So what I'm hoping for is truth telling in higher education. And then I'm hoping for action that matches truth telling. When I think about equity and how we throw it out, we are so good at throwing out all these terms, and we are less good at implementing them, right? So when I think about equity, I think about actually starting with real support strategies for women of color presidents, because all presidents benefit when we support women of color college presidents. So my hope is that we figure out how to love on these folks, because when they run our institutions, our students are successful, they see themselves in powerful positions, and they become powerful, right? And so I would start there. If higher ed is looking for an intentional place, we love tangible takeaways. Start with supporting women of color, and all presidents will benefit.
Yeah, just looking at our 10th update on the tenure and retention report, if you compare California Community College CEOs in 2010 to 2022, the demographics are quite different. So there's far more diversity in every category except for white CEOs. In other words, that in 2010, you had 61% identified as white, and now that's 46%. Black, African American, API, Latino, Latina have all increased. So that's encouraging. And there are people like Dr. Garcia and others and trustees who want to increase and enhance the diversity. Now we also though have to do a much better job of the retention of not just our students, but our CEOs of color. So.
Absolutely. Thank you all for those closing remarks, and I'll just open it quickly to the audience here live, or if you're on Zoom, you can type a question in the chat. I think we have time for just a couple, and then we'll wrap up for the day. I mean, it's already 5:15 on a Monday, so if everyone just wants to go home, I'm very happy to do that too. You just jump in the chat here.
For the women of color CEOs that do retain protective factors for them, like, is it just innate qualities that they're resilient? Do they build their own coalition of support? Like, what keeps them there? Although it's smaller, like, how, for those of us that could this one day, and what notes should we take from it?
Well, I could tell you, we definitely have to be resilient. I mean, just achieving that level of opportunity, you have to be resilient. You have to be strong. You know that you're going to have to be the most knowledgeable once you walk into a room, especially if it's a room that is only filled by males. That, believe it or not, still happens that during this time. So be knowledgeable, and I believe that we continue to learn to be stronger. There is not. I've experienced many challenges, and I continue to be reminded that there's worse challenges. And how do you continue building yourself up and taking care of yourself, your soul, your mind, in spite of the fact that you may be experiencing major challenges. and personal attacks. And I will end by stating that I only believe that it is because I'm fulfilling purpose every day that I continue to stay strong. But support, I that's important. It's important to have the support of people that trust you. And it is important to state that the circle of trust and who rely on becomes smaller the greater level of success you achieve. We're surrounded by many, many people every day, but you're always careful. So I suggest that you hopefully have close friends and find mentors that truly want you to succeed. And that's where you'll find your greatest level of support.
I think that's a really good point. I found that most of the women of color that I've featured in studies or interviewed with have built up networks around themselves, which is additional labor. And so I want us to talk very intentionally about how much uncompensated labor women of color leaders have to take on to survive. They have to self-build resiliency, right? So they build forts of support mechanisms around themselves that I think many of our membership organizations, many of our trustees, we could help fortify, right? Perhaps we can't build it, but maybe we can add some funding for the materials, right? I think we've got to be creative. The other thing I want us to remember is resiliency at what cost? Because I think a lot of women of color are borrowing from tomorrow's resiliency. And I don't know that there's a limitless supply, right? And so I want us to be intentional that while resilience and hope remain the thread that I hear from a lot of women, including yourself, Dr. Garcia, I want us to know that it is not a limitless supply. So these women are literally having to replenish their own hope daily. So if there's something you can do, right? So I think about everybody else, wait, there's what they can do. And then there's what we can do. Dr. Janetta Cole talked about the sister president concept. Who checks on the sister president? And I think we need to be more intentional to check in on women of color presidents, particularly with no agenda, just hello, I just thought about you. And I think that even a little bit of intentionality can go a long way.
Absolutely. So I'll just quickly share to add to that some of the things we found in our research in California that were really supportive to women of color CEOs and to all of the CEOs in the system as well. But particularly, I think resonated with the women that we spoke to. And some of them kind of echo what you both shared as well. But I think one thing is unfortunately kind of just circumstantial, but a lot of women that were successful in their roles and were able to stay in their positions and feel supported, talked about the great team that they had, the great cabinet that they had, the people on campus who were supporting them in other staff positions. But they also talked about, opportunities for professional development. Again, a lot of things are often self-directed, unfortunately, but there are associations and organizations that help support that work. Mentorship came up a lot. I think we've talked about that a lot already today. But the other one that I think we haven't touched on as much is just an opportunity, even informally, to connect with other CEOs. Like Larry said as well, get a dog. Like it's such a lonely role, particularly for women of color. And so I think every person that I interviewed talked about, the league hosts something I think called the Vineyard Symposium. And there are a number of other opportunities that they discussed where they just had times, maybe even at a conference, but just unstructured time to be with other CEOs and talk about, like, you can't talk to anyone else often, even if you have a strong cabinet, there might be confidentiality issues, there might be, trust issues, there might be conflicts of interest. Who can you talk to about what you're going through on campus, if not, other CEOs at other campuses? And so I think finding ways to build those support networks so that women of color in particular don't have to do it themselves, providing more opportunities for CEOs to connect with one another in settings that aren't this, but that are drinks, lunch, somewhere private, being able to vent and just talk about all of your wins, all of your challenges, and have those opportunities.
Yeah. I know we're short on time. I just want to thank the entire panel. You did such a great job and make me feel candid. And Ashley, you mentioned something and we kind of glossed right over it, but you bring up a really good point. Boards are not well trained in hiring committees, and they don't get the same EEO training. So I'm on the board of trustees for the Los Angeles Community College District. I'm on the lead board. I work at a college that's in another district. And when we, as college employees, get on a hiring committee, we're well trained. You know, we get the EEO presentation, we know the do's, the don'ts, we get the, unconscious bias, all of that. But as trustees, nobody goes through that. So this might be a good, we maybe could do something at the league during our conferences and our professional development, because I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
And thank you for bringing that up. And I know we spent much time talking about that. And then really trying to encourage other women and, Martha and I serve on the women's caucus for the California community colleges and really bringing women up through the pipeline. And I mean, we're reaching out to everybody, if you're a faculty member, if you're a classified employee, if you're a dean, if you're a vice president, come, we'll mentor you, get you connected. So thank you.
I'd like to leave the future college presidents with a final statement. It is important to continue to be authentic. Yes, you have to be knowledgeable and be well prepared, and especially as a woman of color, be the best prepared when you walk into certain spaces. But I'm not willing to give up who I am to fill a role, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm fulfilling a purpose, and I could only fulfill that purpose at my best being myself. And we have to be honest that we're not going to be a good fit everywhere. And I'd rather be a good fit in the place where I could be myself than pretend to be someone I'm not, because I will be wasting energy that is needed to focus on my students. So be authentic, be you, and be your best.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you all so much.
Goes a long way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we had, State colleges and universities. College and system, and I wanted to